The first time he saw her, she was standing on the edge of his campfire's light, soaked from the mountain rain, her dress clinging to her like wilted bark. Hair matted, hands trembling, but her voice was steady. "I need shelter," she said. "And you need a son." Silas Boone didn't move, didn't blink. The logs in the fire cracked, spitting up sparks between them. Her words hung in the air like mist, rising off the soaked earth. He took in her silhouette, small but unshaking, and the boy beside her, no older than 4, with eyes too big for his narrow face and a ribcage you could count through his shirt. Boone had lived up on Stone Ridge for 8 winters, and in all that time, no one had ever dared to say a thing like that to him. But let's go back to where it all started. The high country above Twin Valley was no place for the tender-hearted. That's why Boone lived there. A man couldn't miss what he'd buried. The pines grew thick and moaned in the wind, like the mountains themselves were mourning. Snow still clung to the north slopes, even in spring. Wolves called some nights. Other nights, it was just silence, the kind that got inside your head and set the past walking around again. Boone's cabin was a squat, 2-room thing he'd built himself. No neighbors, no trail signs, just a creek, a smokehouse, and the scars on his hands to tell him time still moved forward. He was out chopping wood when he heard the first sound, not hoofbeats, not shouting, just breathing. Too close. He turned, hand instinctively going to the axe blade sunk in the stump. A woman and the boy, they'd come from the trees like ghosts, both soaked, both caked with mud from the slope. She didn't flinch when he looked at her, didn't explain herself. She simply lifted her chin and said again, quieter now, "We need shelter." Boone hadn't spoken aloud in days. When he finally did, his voice came out rough as gravel. "You lost?" The woman's lips twitched, not a smile, not quite, not anymore. He looked at the boy, then back at her. Something about her reminded him of snowmelt just before flood. Calm now, but not for long. "I ain't got much," he said. She looked at the cabin, the smoke curling from the chimney. "You've got enough." Boone could have said no. Should have. But he opened the door and let them step inside. She didn't give her name that first night. Just dried the boy by the stove and fed him from their own satchel. A crumpled paper sack with 3 dry biscuits and half a strip of jerked meat. Boone pretended not to notice how she gave her portion to the boy. The woman asked for nothing. But after the boy fell asleep, wrapped in an old quilt Boone handed her, she finally sat near the fire and looked up at him. "You lost someone?" she asked. Boone froze halfway through whittling a strip of pine. His eyes flicked to the photo. On the mantel, a young woman with her hand on his shoulder, baby in her arms. Dead now. Both of them. She nodded slowly, like she already knew. "I did too," she said. "My husband last year. Fever took him. My second boy a few weeks later. The little one, he's all that's left." Boone didn't reply. He didn't know how. He just watched the fire crawl across the logs, burning quiet and slow. The woman's voice softened. "You think God hears us way out here?" Boone rubbed a hand over his beard. "If he does, he sure keeps quiet about it." She gave a small laugh, dry but not cruel. Then silence again, until she said it. "I need shelter, and you need a son." It didn't come out flirtatious. It came out like truth. Plain. Bone deep. Boone looked at the boy sleeping, his cheek resting on one fist like he didn't know what nightmares were yet. Then back at her. Her eyes were tired, but clear. Not pleading. Not hopeful. Just open. "You offering yourself?" he asked flatly. "No," she said. "I'm offering him a chance. With someone who might still believe. In quiet mornings. In fence posts. In something that stays put." Boone stood and walked to the door. Opened it. Cold air poured in. She didn't flinch. He looked out into the night like he expected something to change. Then shut it again. "There's extra blankets in the chest," he said. She nodded. Said nothing more. Just knelt beside the boy and curled around him like a second skin. Boone didn't sleep much that night. Kept the fire fed. Watched shadows shift across the log walls. Next morning, he chopped twice the wood he needed. The boy watched from the porch steps, barefoot but curious. Didn't speak, but when Boone offered him the small hatchet, the boy took it with both hands. The woman was inside, cleaning without being asked. Mended the torn curtain. Washed a pot that hadn't seen water in weeks. Boone said nothing. But at midday, he went into town. It was 10 miles by mule, and the dirt trail had turned to mush from the spring melt. He arrived at the feed store past 2. Men watched him tie up his mule like they always did. A glance, then averted eyes. Folks had long since learned Boone wasn't the talking kind. But today he spoke. "Need more flour," he said to Earl behind the counter. "And 2 more plates." Earl raised an eyebrow. "Expecting company?" Boone just looked at him, and Earl shut up. Before leaving, Boone added one more thing. "You got any shoes for a boy about yay tall?" He held out his hand, palm level to the counter. Earl squinted. "You got a kid?" Boone's jaw worked for a second before he replied. "Maybe." That night, back in the cabin, the woman said nothing as he handed her the supplies. Just unpacked them slowly. When she saw the shoes, she blinked once. Then looked at Boone. "You still don't even know my name." Boone shrugged. "Ain't asked yet." She extended a hand, firm. "Clara." He took it. Rough palms met worn knuckles. "Boone." For the first time, Clara smiled. And Boone realized it wasn't the shelter she'd been asking for. Not really. The mule kicked up dust behind Boone as he rode into town again 3 days later. Clara had stayed back with the boy, her boy, who'd taken to following Boone like a silent shadow around the cabin, watching every chore, every movement, like he was learning how the world worked by watching one man. Boone hadn't asked the boy's name yet. Somehow it didn't feel like his place. Not yet, but people were already talking. "You seen Boone's place?" murmured a ranch hand outside the mercantile. "He's got a woman now. And a boy. Some say he took her in. Some say she came to him. Some say she's trouble." It wasn't the whispers that got under Boone's skin. It was how fast they traveled. By the time he reached the post office shack, old Walter Grady was already waiting, leaning on his cane like he'd been expecting Boone for a week. "Wasn't sure I'd ever see you back around these parts," Walter said. Then again, news spreads faster than stagecoaches these days. Boone didn't reply. Walter scratched his beard. "She yours?" Boone met his eyes. "No, but she's staying?" "For now." Walter gave a slow nod, as if weighing the years Boone had spent alone against the woman and child who now shared his fire. "Well," the old man said, "a quiet cabin can make a man forget who he used to be. But it don't make the neighbors forget." Boone loaded the flour and oil onto his mule and didn't look back. That evening, Clara was outside chopping kindling when he returned. The boy sat near the stream, stacking pebbles into strange little shapes, towers or fences, or maybe graves. Boone couldn't tell. Inside, the cabin smelled like something warm and simple, beans, maybe, or cornbread. Clara had a way of making it feel like a home, and that unsettled Boone more than any outlaw or wolf ever had. After supper, the boy finally spoke. "My name's Eli." Boone looked up from where he was oiling the rifle. Clara didn't say anything, just folded a shirt slowly, keeping her eyes on the cloth. Boone gave a quiet nod. "That's a good name." Eli hesitated. "You gonna keep us?" Boone wasn't ready for that question. It wasn't said with pleading or fear, just the soft weight of a boy who'd seen too much loss and needed something to land on. Clara's hand stilled. Boone cleared his throat. "I don't know yet." Eli nodded like that made sense, like he'd expected that answer. Then went back to stacking twigs near the hearth. The next morning, folks had come. It started with a wagon on the ridge. Then 2 riders. All strangers. Boone watched from the tree line as 3 men surveyed his land, their figures outlined against the blue sky like hawks on a perch. He didn't go out to meet them. Not right away. Just watched. Clara came out with a tin of water for the chickens. She saw them too. "That them?" she asked quietly. Boone didn't answer. She nodded. "They followed me from Platte River." Boone finally turned. "You run from someone." She met his eyes. From what they were becoming. Boone set his jaw. "You bring trouble to my door?" Clara didn't blink. "I brought a boy who needed a future. Same as any of us." He stared at her a moment, then walked inside and took the rifle off the wall. By noon, the riders came down from the ridge. Boone stood outside, arms crossed. Clara stayed inside, Eli beside her. The first rider, a broad-shouldered man with weathered skin and pale eyes, spoke first. "Name's Merritt. Heard there's a woman here, matches one we've been looking for." Boone didn't flinch. "Lot of women in the world. You sure it's mine you're after?" "She ain't yours," Merritt said evenly. "She was promised to a man down in Platte. Ran before the wedding. Took his son with her." Boone's eyes narrowed. "You saying she stole her own boy?" "She stole a future." Man raised that child since he was 2 days old. Boone shifted. His stance, weight settling like stone. What's your interest? Family paid me to find her. Make things right. Boone looked him over. Not law. Not kin. Just a man for hire with a bad-shaped ego and a debt to collect. Inside the cabin, the curtain moved, Clara peeking through. Boone said nothing. Just raised one eyebrow. Merritt chuckled. You really think this ends in your favor? Boone's voice was flat. I think the mountains pick their own. And they don't pick men like you. Merritt leaned on the saddle horn. You want to die for a woman you just met? Boone turned and walked toward the cabin. No, he said. I just don't want a boy thinking the world's full of men who don't stand for nothing. He shut the cabin door behind him. That night, Clara sat by the fire with Eli tucked against her. Boone sat near the window, rifle across his lap. No words. Just the sound of wind shifting through the trees outside, and the long, slow breathing of a house that wasn't used to feeling full. You don't owe us this, Clara said. I know, Boone replied. I'm not yours, she added. I know that too. She hesitated. Then why? Boone didn't answer right away, just stared into the dark beyond the shutters. Finally, he said, because once someone asked me to stay, and I didn't. He didn't say more. Didn't need to. Clara looked at the boy sleeping, then at Boone. Outside, in the dark, a second rider joined Merritt at the ridge, and the fire burned on, steady, quiet, defiant. The sun barely crested the ridge before Boone knew something had changed. The air was still. Too still. The birds had gone quiet, and even the mule's ears stood high and stiff. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung over his shoulder, and scanned the line of trees along the western slope. Smoke. Thin, distant, rising in a long, straight line. Not from his chimney, not from his neighbors, he didn't have any. Controlled. Intentional. A signal. Boone turned to the cabin. Clara, take Eli inside. She appeared at the door instantly, already clutching the boy's hand. She didn't ask questions, just obeyed, like she'd seen this kind of quiet before. Like she knew what followed. Boone moved to the shed and pulled out the Henry rifle, not as usual, but longer range. It hadn't been fired since his wife passed, and just cleaning it brought a weight he hadn't felt in years. Clara stood in the doorway, her voice low. That man, Merritt, he won't wait. Boone nodded. I figured that. You think they'll come tonight? No, Boone said. They'll come now. By midday, the riders had returned. Not 3 this time, 6. And a wagon. Boone saw them from the rise above his pasture, knee-deep in brush, the Henry in his arms. Merritt dismounted, walked toward the cabin with the slow arrogance of a man convinced he'd already won, but Boone didn't fire. Not yet. Merritt called out, loud enough for the valley to hear. Boone, I ain't here to hurt anyone. Just want what's owed. Boone emerged from behind the bluff like a shadow sliding free from the mountain. You want a woman who don't want you, and a boy who don't know your name. That's not owed. That's stolen. Merritt spread his arms wide, laughing. You think you're some kind of mountain judge now? Boone stopped 20 feet away. I think I've seen more truth in that boy's eyes than in any lawman or preacher this side of the Rockies. One of Merritt's men spoke. You ain't law, Boone. Boone didn't blink. Neither are you. A long, tense silence. Then, Merritt took a step forward. I was paid to bring her back. That means I leave with her, or someone bleeds. Boone's voice dropped low. You fire a shot in this valley, and the mountain swallows you whole. That's not a warning. That's what happens. Eli's small face appeared in the cabin window. Watching, Boone saw him. And something in him changed, not out of fear, but out of memory. The boy's eyes reminded him of his own son. Back when the world was still good, still simple before. Fever and graves and long winters that didn't end. Boone didn't lift the rifle. He didn't have to, Merritt snarled. You can't keep her forever. She's not property, Boone said. She's not yours to take. And then Clara stepped out of the cabin. Every man turned to look. She held Eli's hand, firm, steady. Her dress was clean, her hair tied back, and her chin high like a frontier queen standing guard over her last acre of dignity. If you think I belong to anyone, she said clearly, then you've already lost whatever made you a man. Even Merritt flinched at her tone. Clara turned to Boone, and for the first time, her voice trembled. But if this ends in fire, Boone, you don't let him see it. Promise me. Boone nodded once. I promise. That night, the moon hung low and red like a blood coin. Boone sat at the window, rifle on the sill. Eli was asleep in Clara's lap, his breathing soft and shallow. They'll come after dark, Clara whispered. I know. You could still send us away. Down the slope. To town. Boone's face didn't change. Not how I was raised. You lost your boy, she said quietly. You don't have to risk yourself for mine. Boone looked at her then, really looked. Saw the years she'd carried on her back. The grief. The grit. The threadbare strength of a woman who'd buried love and still kept going. He set the rifle down. You didn't ask me for love, he said. You asked me for shelter. Clara nodded, slowly. And you gave it. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats. Boone stood. Clara moved toward the bedroom, lifting Eli in her arms like he weighed nothing. She didn't say goodbye. Outside, 6 riders crept through the pines. One held a torch. The crack of Boone's rifle cut through the trees like thunder. The torch flew from the man's hand. Not a kill shot, just a warning. But the message was clear. This land had a voice now. And it didn't whisper. The men scattered behind rocks and tree trunks, calling to each other in rough whispers. Merritt's voice rang out. You got one chance, Boone. You already used yours. Boone called back. Another shot cracked, this time from the east. A stray bullet nicked the edge of Boone's cabin, throwing splinters into the porch beam. Clara ducked inside, covering Eli with her body. Boone fired again. And again. Then everything went still. The riders didn't push. Not yet. They were testing. But Boone knew the worst part was coming. That moment of silence, right before the storm, that he chambered another round and muttered under his breath. Not a prayer, but something close. Let the mountain choose. The storm didn't come all at once. It bled in, quiet and mean, like cold creeping into bone. The riders circled wide, using the dark and the terrain. Boone could hear them. The shift of hooves against wet pine needles, the low murmur of men trying to sound braver than they were. Inside, Clara had placed Eli beneath the bed with a blanket and a whisper. The boy didn't cry, just stared at her with eyes like still water. Waiting, trusting. Boone moved through the cabin like a man who knew it too well. Every floorboard, every creak, every sight line from the shutters. The Henry was warm now, like it had remembered its purpose. Clara stood by the hearth, gripping a fire poker like it was a sword. You ever shot a man? Boone asked softly. No, she replied. But I've looked 3 in the eye who thought I wouldn't. None of them tried twice. He almost smiled. Then glass shattered. A shot punched through the front window, burying itself into the log wall beside Clara's head. She didn't flinch. Boone was already down low, scanning the treeline, spotting the flicker of movement in the moonlight. He fired once. A scream echoed. Not fatal, but close. You bring a boy into a fight, Merritt's voice shouted from the dark. You better be ready to bury him too. Clara's voice rang back, fierce and sharp. He's safer here than he ever was with you. A pause. Then Merritt replied, quieter now. You think this man's gonna save you? He's already half dead, living off ghosts. Boone's jaw clenched, but he didn't take the bait. Instead, he moved to the back door, opened it slowly, and slipped out into the dark. The trees swallowed him. Thick pine trunks, moonlight slicing through in slats. His boots barely touched earth. He moved like he used to, back before the cabin, before grief rooted him to the floorboards. That he circled wide. Heard one man whispering too loud. Boone crept up, raised the butt of his rifle, and knocked him out cold without a word. Another tried to light a second torch. Boone shot it out of his hand before it even sparked. That left 4. The third man spotted him. Fired. Missed. Boone didn't. The shot rang out clean, sending the man tumbling backward into the underbrush. Back at the cabin, a 4th rider had dismounted and crept toward the front door. Clara saw the shadow cross the window. She didn't shout, just stepped behind the door and raised the poker. Hi. The man burst in, and Clara swung. Iron met temple with a sickening crack. He dropped instantly. Eli crawled out from under the bed, eyes wide. She knelt beside him. Back in. Don't come out till Boone opens the door. The boy nodded and slid back into the dark. Outside, Boone stood now at the edge of the clearing. Merritt had lit a torch again, waving it like a devil's banner. You think killing my men makes you righteous? He called out. You think that's justice? Boone stepped into the open. No, he said. But I think this boy's life ain't yours to take. and neither is hers. Merritt sneered. You think she loves you? Boone didn't answer. She's using you. Merritt spat. She runs when things get hard. She ran from him. She'll run from you. Boone's voice was calm. Then I'll hold the door open for her. But she ain't going with you. Merritt lifted his pistol. Clara stepped out of the cabin. No, she said. Merritt froze. Go back inside. You want me? She said, voice strong now. Come try and take me. But I ain't yours. I was never his. And if Boone falls tonight, I'll bury him with honor, not shame. Because he stood for something. Merritt's hand trembled. You're making a mistake, he hissed. Clara stepped forward. So did you. You thought I'd still be afraid. Merritt aimed at Boone. Boone didn't move. Then came the sound. Sharp, startling. Not from the trees, not from Boone. Clack. Eli stood on the porch, Clara's old revolver in both hands. Tiny. Shaking. But pointed straight. Don't hurt him, the boy said. He's my papa now. Everyone froze. Merritt stared at the boy. Boone's rifle stayed low. His eyes locked on Merritt's, waiting. A beat. 2. Merritt lowered his gun. He looked at Clara, then at Boone, then finally at the boy. You're all fools, he muttered. And he turned. Walked to his horse. Mounted. Disappeared into the trees without another word. Later, the fire burned low. Boone sat on the porch step, the Henry across his lap. The night was still again. Clara stood behind him, arms crossed tight, as if holding herself together. You all right? He asked. She nodded. You? He gave a quiet grunt. From inside, Eli's voice called out, Can I come out? Boone turned. Yes, son. It's over. Clara looked at him. He hadn't meant to say it, but she didn't correct him. Eli stepped out into the porch light, barefoot and blinking. He walked over and sat beside Boone without a word. Leaned his head against Boone's arm. Clara sat beside them. For a long while, they watched the dark trees. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. Just the sound of pine needles shifting in the wind. And a cabin that no longer belonged to one man alone. The snow came early that year. Thick, wet flakes that settled onto the roof and muffled the world. By the time October ended, the pass was already closing behind them. No wagons. No riders. Just the mountain, white and wide and final, wrapping its arms around the cabin like it meant to keep them. Boone sat sharpening a blade at the table while Clara stirred something in the pot. It smelled like rabbit and wild onions, a poor man's stew, but it felt like a feast. Eli sat by the hearth carving a block of pine with his pocket knife. He'd taken to wearing Boone's old boots, 2 sizes too big, flopping with every step. He didn't care. He followed Boone everywhere now, trapping, mending fence, even splitting wood. He had Boone's silence too. But not his sorrow that, Boone hoped, stayed buried. You ever think about heading back down the mountain? Clara asked gently, not turning from the stove. Boone paused. Ran a thumb down the blade's edge. No. Clara nodded, like she'd expected the answer. Me neither, she said. They got through November by working every day. Boone hauled timber. Clara dried meat and patched clothing. Eli made a game of stacking kindling, sometimes building little wooden fences in the snow and pretending they were ranch corrals. They were quiet days. Soft. Boone hadn't lived like that since before the fever. Since before the graves on the ridge behind the cabin. Some mornings he found himself rising before dawn just to watch the boy breathe. Just to see the quilt rise and fall. One night, Clara found him standing outside in the snow, staring up at the moon. You all right? She asked. Boone kept his eyes on the stars. Just waiting for the catch. The catch. Boone shrugged. The moment this all ends. The moment I lose it again. Clara stepped closer. Her hand brushed his. I can't promise you it'll last, she said softly. But I can promise you I'll stay. Until I can't. Boone didn't reply. Just took her hand, rough calloused fingers into his palm, and let himself hold something again. Weeks passed. The trail remained blocked. That on Christmas morning, Eli ran out into the snow in nothing but his wool coat and boots, shouting, It's still coming down, like he couldn't believe it. Boone watched him from the doorway, coffee steaming in his hands. Clara wrapped a scarf around Boone's neck before stepping out beside him. Eli returned a moment later, clutching something in his mittened hands. He opened them, 2 pine cones, a twig, and a tiny rock with a line through it. It's a family, he explained. Like us. Boone crouched beside him, looked at the little figures. This one's you, Eli said, pointing to the biggest. Pinecone. And this one's Mama. And this, he held up the rock. This is me. 'Cause I'm little but strong. Clara smiled. Boone didn't speak. Eli pushed the Pinecone family into the snow like a shrine. And then he said it, casually, like he'd always known. I think you're my real papa. I think maybe God just forgot to tell you until now. Boone's throat closed. He hadn't cried since the funeral. Not even when he buried the second grave on the ridge. But this time, he had to turn his face toward the wind that in early January, a rider came through, alone, exhausted, half frozen. He brought no trouble, just a letter. Boone opened it with stiff fingers that it was from the sheriff in Platte River. The man Clara had once been promised to. He was dead. Fever took him. The family that hired Merritt wanted no further claim. The search was over. Clara was free. Boone handed the letter to her. Washed her face as she read. She exhaled slow. Looked up. You still want us here? She asked. Boone didn't answer right away. Then he reached into the cupboard. Pulled out a box. Opened it. Inside was a ring. Plain. Silver. Worn. I buried her with mine, Boone said. But this one, this was hers. Clara stared. Boone stood there, holding it out in his palm. I ain't asking for a vow, he said. Just a yes. Clara looked from the ring to the man. Then down the hall, where Eli was asleep on the floor with the dog curled beside him. She stepped forward and took it. Yes. That spring, when the melt finally came, Boone took Eli up the ridge. The graves were still there, marked with 2 wooden crosses, weathered but upright. Eli stood between them, quiet. Was that your boy? He asked. Boone nodded. Eli reached into his pocket, pulled out one of his carving toys, a tiny wooden horse. He placed it between the graves. Now he has company, Eli said. Boone swallowed hard. Later, as they walked back down the trail, Eli looked up. Can we build more fence this summer? Boone smiled. We can build anything you want. Clara was waiting at the cabin, flower on her hands, apron tied tight around her waist. She waved. Boone lifted Eli and waved back, and somewhere, in the silence that followed, the mountain exhaled, not in sorrow, in peace.